The conference room on the 23rd floor smelled like recycled air and expensive coffee. Marcus Chen sat at the head of the table, his fingers interlaced in front of him, watching Sarah Brennan gather her laptop and water bottle with the kind of deliberate slowness that comes from shock. Her security badge still hung from her neck, the photo showing a woman who smiled more easily than the one standing before him now. "I don't understand," she said, her voice steady but her hands trembling slightly as she zipped her laptop bag. "My performance reviews have been excellent. The penetration testing I designed caught 3 major vulnerabilities last quarter alone." Marcus looked past her, through the glass walls of the conference room to the Seattle skyline beyond. Rain streaked the windows in thin, relentless lines. November in the Pacific Northwest always felt like this. Gray, heavy, inescapable. "This isn't about your technical skills, Sarah," he said, keeping his tone professional, almost gentle. "It's about team dynamics, cultural fit." She let out a sharp breath that might have been a laugh. "Cultural fit, that's what we're calling it." He met her eyes then. Sarah was 41, almost his age, with the kind of direct gaze that made board members uncomfortable. She'd been with Quantum Systems for 6 years, the last 2 as senior security analyst. She was brilliant, abrasive, and completely unable to play the political games that kept companies like Quantum afloat. "You've alienated key stakeholders," Marcus continued, falling back on the script HR had given him. "The development team has filed 3 complaints about your communication style in the past 2 months. You called their new authentication protocol security theater in a company-wide email. Because it is." Sarah's voice rose slightly. "It's a checkbox solution that makes executives feel safe while leaving our actual infrastructure vulnerable. I was doing my job. Your job is to work collaboratively with other departments. My job is to protect this company's data." The silence that followed felt dense enough to suffocate. Marcus could hear the muted hum of the building's HVAC system, the distant ping of an elevator arriving on their floor. Outside, a seagull landed on the window ledge, its feathers ruffled by wind. "The decision is final," Marcus said quietly. "HR will process your separation package. You'll receive 3 months severance, continuation of benefits. It's generous." Sarah stared at him for a long moment. Her jaw worked like she was chewing on words she wouldn't allow herself to say. Finally, she picked up her bag and walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the handle. "There's something wrong with the new cloud migration," she said, her back still to him. "I've been tracking unusual access patterns in the admin logs. Someone's probing our systems, learning our architecture. I was going to present my findings next week." Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. "Forward your notes to the security team. I am the security team, Marcus. Or I was." She turned then, and he saw something in her expression that wasn't anger or hurt. It was pity. "Jake Thompson from DevOps is taking over my responsibilities, right? The guy who thinks 2-factor authentication is inconvenient for users? Jake has his master's in... Jake has a degree. I have 12 years of experience hunting actual threats." She opened the door. "Good luck." Marcus sat alone in the conference room for 20 minutes after she left, watching the rain and wondering why doing the right thing for the company felt so much like a mistake. The call from David Reeves came at 6:47 p.m., just as Marcus was packing up to leave. David was Quantum's chief operating officer, the man who'd pushed hardest for Sarah's removal after she'd publicly questioned his pet project. A rapid cloud infrastructure migration that would save the company millions and not coincidentally make David look brilliant to the board. "Is it done?" David asked without preamble. Marcus closed his office door. "She's been processed out. Security escorted her from the building at 4:15. "Good, good." David's relief was audible. I know that wasn't easy, Marcus, but she was becoming a liability. You can't have someone undermining leadership at every turn. She mentioned something before she left, Marcus said, choosing his words carefully, about unusual access patterns in the cloud migration logs. A pause. Sarah sees threats everywhere. It's why she couldn't function in a collaborative environment. Did she leave documentation? She said she was going to present findings next week. Well, she won't be here next week, will she? David's tone shifted, became lighter. Jake Thompson is solid. He'll handle security oversight. Trust me on this, Marcus. You made the right call. Team cohesion matters more than one brilliant but difficult person. That's leadership. Marcus ended the call and sat in the dark office, watching the city lights blink on across Seattle. His reflection in the window looked tired, older than 43. He'd climbed to VP of Operations by making decisions like this, hard calls that balanced people against profit, individual concerns against organizational needs. So why did his hands feel dirty? He thought about Sarah's final words, the certainty in her voice when she talked about threats to their systems. He thought about Jake Thompson, competent but conventional, the kind of security professional who checked boxes rather than hunted vulnerabilities. Marcus pulled up his email and searched for Sarah's recent messages. There were dozens: incident reports, vulnerability assessments, warnings about rushed deployments. He opened the most recent one, sent 3 days ago to the entire Security Review Board. Subject: urgent. Anomalous admin access patterns. Cloud migration I've identified concerning activity in our Azure environment. Multiple API calls from unrecognized IP addresses, all targeting our administrative control plane. Access patterns suggest reconnaissance rather than routine operations. Recommend immediate audit of all privileged accounts and temporary freeze on additional cloud migrations until we can... The email ended mid-sentence. Sarah had never sent it. It sat in her drafts folder, unfinished. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. He forwarded the draft to Jake Thompson with a brief note. Sarah was tracking this before her departure. Please review and advise. The response came back in 4 minutes. Checked the logs. Looks like routine automated processes. Nothing to worry about. Jake. 4 minutes. Sarah would have spent 4 days analyzing those logs, cross-referencing them, building a case. Jake had glanced and dismissed. Marcus shut down his computer and grabbed his coat. Outside, Seattle's evening rush hour clogged the streets with red taillights and frustrated honking. He walked to the parking garage, his mind churning. He'd made the right decision. Sarah was difficult, confrontational, unable to work within the system. Companies couldn't function when individual contributors refused to compromise, refused to trust their colleagues. But what if she'd been right? His phone buzzed with a text from his wife. Working late again? He typed back, heading home now. Long day. The elevator descended 23 floors. Marcus watched the numbers count down and tried to remember the last time a decision had sat this uneasily in his gut. Sarah Brennan sat in her apartment in Capitol Hill, surrounded by 3 monitors and the scattered remnants of her professional life. The separation paperwork lay on her kitchen counter, still unsigned. Her cat, a grey tabby named Cypher, wound between her legs, seeking attention she couldn't give. She'd spent the past 4 hours doing what she always did when the world made no sense. She dug deeper into the data. The logs she'd pulled from quantum systems before her access was revoked told a story. Not a complete story, not yet, but enough to make her chest tight with certainty. Someone was inside Quantum's network, moving carefully, learning the architecture like a burglar studying a house before the break-in. The access patterns were subtle, API calls that looked almost legitimate. Queries that stayed just below the threshold that would trigger automated alerts, but Sarah had spent 12 years learning to see the shapes hidden in noise. This was reconnaissance. Professional, patient, dangerous, and she'd been fired for trying to stop it. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Sarah Brennan. Miss Brennan, this is Detective Aaron Voss with the Seattle Police Department's Cyber Crimes Unit. The voice was measured, official. I'm calling about a data breach investigation involving your former employer, Quantum Systems. Do you have a few minutes to talk? Sarah closed her eyes. She'd known this was coming, had felt it building like pressure before a storm. Yes, she said. I have time. Good. Because 3 hours ago, someone accessed Quantum's customer database and extracted approximately 3 million user records. And according to our initial forensics, the access came through a backdoor that's been sitting in their system for at least 6 weeks. Sarah opened her laptop and pulled up the logs she'd been studying 6 weeks ago, right when the cloud migration had begun. Detective, she said quietly, I think I know how they got in. Marcus's Tuesday morning started with an emergency all-hands meeting that wasn't on any calendar. He arrived at Quantum's headquarters at 6:30 a.m. to find the lobby already crowded with confused employees, their badges not working on the turnstiles. Security guards manually checked IDs, waving people through with grim expressions. The email had gone out at 5:47 a.m. Subject line in all caps, mandatory attendance, security incident. He found David Reeves in the executive conference room, pacing like a caged animal. The COO's usually immaculate appearance had cracked. His tie was loose, his hair uncombed. 2 men Marcus didn't recognize sat at the table, laptops open, expressions professionally neutral. Marcus, thank God. David grabbed his arm. We have a situation. The taller of the 2 strangers stood and extended his hand. Craig Morrison, Sentinel Security Consulting. We've been brought in to assess the breach. What breach? Marcus felt the floor tilt slightly beneath him. Approximately 3 million customer records, Craig said, his tone clinically detached. Social security numbers, credit card data, medical information for our healthcare clients. Someone accessed our primary database through an administrative backdoor and extracted everything that wasn't encrypted. The room went quiet. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat, loud and insistent in his ears. When? He managed. The extraction happened Sunday night between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m., but the backdoor itself. Craig glanced at his colleague. We're still determining how long it's been there. Weeks, possibly months. Jake Thompson was supposed to be monitoring, Marcus started. Jake Thompson discovered the breach at 3 a.m. Monday morning when our automated systems finally flagged the data transfer volume. David interrupted, his voice sharp. He's been working with law enforcement since then. Where is he now? Giving his statement to the FBI. David ran a hand through his hair. This is catastrophic, Marcus. We're talking tens of millions in liability, regulatory fines, class action lawsuits. Our stock is going to crater when this goes public. Marcus thought about Sarah Brennan's draft email, the warning she'd never finished sending. We need to call Sarah. The room went silent. Absolutely not, David said. She was tracking unusual access patterns. She specifically warned she was fired for cause. David's face flushed. Bringing her back now looks like an admission that we made a mistake. It undermines everything. We did make a mistake. The words came out before Marcus could stop them. She told me there was something wrong with the cloud migration. I dismissed it. Craig Morrison cleared his throat. Actually, Ms. Brennan has already been contacted. She's meeting with law enforcement this morning. Apparently she pulled logs before her access was terminated and has been analyzing them independently. David's face went from red to white. She stole company data. She backed up her work files, Craig corrected gently. Which is standard practice for any security professional, and right now those files might be the only complete record we have of how this breach occurred. Marcus felt something sharp and hot lodge behind his sternum. I need to talk to her. That's not advisable, Craig began, but Marcus was already moving toward the door. The Seattle FBI field office occupied a nondescript building in the University District, all concrete and tinted glass. Marcus had never been inside a federal law enforcement facility before. The security screening process took 20 minutes, emptying pockets, removing his belt and shoes, signing forms he barely read. Detective Voss met him in the lobby, a compact man in his 50s with skeptical eyes and a coffee stain on his tie. "Mr. Chen, I understand you want to speak with Ms. Brennan. Is she here?" "She is, but I need to be clear. This is an active criminal investigation. Anything you discuss with her is not protected by attorney-client privilege. If either of you makes statements relevant to the case, I may need to document them. I just need to talk to her." Voss studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Conference room 3, you have 20 minutes. Sarah sat at a scarred table, a laptop open in front of her and a half-empty bottle of water at her elbow. She'd pulled her dark hair back in a ponytail, and there were shadows under her eyes that suggested she'd slept as little as Marcus had. She looked up when he entered, her expression carefully neutral. "Sarah, Marcus." She didn't stand, didn't offer any social pleasantries. "Let me guess. David sent you to do damage control." He closed the door and sat down across from her. "No one sent me. I came because I need to understand what happened." "You fired me for trying to stop what happened." The words landed like punches. Marcus absorbed them, nodded. "You're right. I did. I made a call based on internal politics instead of the evidence you were presenting. That was wrong." Sarah's eyebrows rose slightly. "Wow, actual accountability from a C-suite executive. Should I check for flying pigs?" Despite everything, Marcus almost smiled. This was the Sarah that had alienated half the company. Sharp, sarcastic, unwilling to soften her edges. It was also the Sarah who'd been right. "Tell me about the back door," he said. She turned her laptop so he could see the screen. Lines of code scrolled past, dense and cryptic. The cloud migration that David pushed through, it was fast-tracked, too fast. Normal security protocols were bypassed to meet his aggressive timeline. "I remember. He said the competitive landscape demanded rapid deployment. What David didn't say was that rushing the migration meant using automated deployment templates without proper security hardening. Someone knew that. They watched the migration happen, identified the vulnerable configuration, and inserted their access method during the transition window." "How?" Sarah pulled up a different screen. Access logs, timestamps, IP addresses. "See these API calls? They're coming from a legitimate Azure service endpoint, which is why they didn't trigger our standard intrusion detection. But the calls themselves are requesting administrative privileges that no normal service would need." Marcus leaned closer, trying to make sense of the data. "You saw this 6 weeks ago?" "I saw the pattern forming. I didn't have enough evidence to prove malicious intent yet, but I knew something was wrong. That's what I was trying to tell you in my draft email." Jake Thompson reviewed the same logs and said they were routine. Sarah's laugh was bitter. Jake Thompson couldn't find a backdoor if someone painted it red and labeled it, "Criminals enter here." "He's a checkbox security guy, Marcus. He makes sure the company meets regulatory requirements and doesn't ask uncomfortable questions about actual threats." "Which is exactly why David wanted him in the role, instead of you." Finally catching on. Marcus sat back in his chair. Outside the conference room, he could hear phones ringing, voices discussing cases in careful bureaucratic tones. "The FBI thinks you might have information about who did this." "I have theories. The access pattern suggests someone with deep knowledge of Azure infrastructure. The timing suggests they were monitoring our company announcements, waiting for the migration to begin. And the data they extracted." She pulled up another file. They knew exactly what they wanted. Medical records, financial data, personally identifiable information, nothing random. professional criminals, or corporate espionage, or nation-state actors. Take your pick. Sarah closed her laptop. The point is, this was sophisticated, patient, and entirely preventable if anyone had listened to the paranoid security analyst who kept sending alarming emails. Marcus looked at her directly. "I'm sorry, Sarah. That's inadequate, I know. But I am genuinely sorry. You were doing your job and I punished you for it because it was politically inconvenient." She held his gaze for a long moment. "Why are you here, Marcus? Really? Because I want to make this right. You can't. 3 million people had their data stolen. Some of them will have their identities stolen, their credit ruined, their lives disrupted. You can't undo that with an apology. I know, but I can help find who did this. I can make sure the investigation has every resource it needs. You can tell David Reeves that his corner-cutting and his ego put this company at risk," Sarah interrupted. "You can tell the board that prioritizing speed over security has consequences. You can actually change how Quantum operates so this doesn't happen again. I can try. Trying isn't enough." She stood up, gathering her laptop. "But it's a start." Detective Voss knocked on the door and poked his head in. "Ms. Brennan, the FBI agents are ready for you." Sarah nodded, then looked back at Marcus. "If you really want to help, get me my job back, or at least my access to the systems. I can trace this breach better than anyone you're going to hire, and I'm motivated." "David will never..." "Then work around David, your VP of operations. Act like it." She walked out, leaving Marcus alone in the conference room with the weight of his own failures pressing down like water at depth. The emergency board meeting convened at 2 p.m. in Quantum's largest conference room. 14 faces stared at Marcus and David from around the table: board members, major investors, the company's general counsel. The mood was funereal. David presented the facts with clinical precision: the breach, the data loss, the preliminary forensics. He outlined the response plan: Sentinel Security's investigation, law enforcement cooperation, customer notification protocols. He was smooth, professional, almost detached. Then came the questions. "How did this happen?" asked Patricia Monroe, the board chair and a former Microsoft executive with famously little patience for incompetence. David launched into an explanation about sophisticated attack vectors and inevitable security risks in modern cloud infrastructure. Marcus listened and felt something inside him break. "That's not accurate," he heard himself say. The room went silent. David turned to stare at him. "We were warned," Marcus continued, standing up. "Our senior security analyst identified anomalous access patterns 6 weeks ago. She was tracking the threat, building evidence, preparing a presentation for the Security Review Board." "Sarah Brennan," Patricia said, "who we terminated last week for poor cultural fit." "Who we terminated," Marcus corrected, "because she was vocal about security concerns that conflicted with our aggressive cloud migration timeline, the same migration that created the vulnerability hackers exploited." David's face had gone stone still. "Marcus, this is not the time for..." "When is the time, David? After the lawsuits, after the regulatory investigations, after our customers' lives are ruined?" Marcus pulled up Sarah's draft email on the conference room screen. "She tried to tell us. We didn't want to hear it, because listening would have meant slowing down, spending more money, questioning executive decisions." Patricia leaned forward. "Are you saying this breach was preventable?" "I'm saying we created the conditions that made it possible. We prioritized speed over security, executive convenience over expert judgment, and when someone raised concerns, we fired her." The room erupted in overlapping voices. David was standing now too, his face flushed with anger. Patricia Monroe raised a hand for silence. Mr. Chen, that's a serious allegation. Do you have evidence to support it? Marcus looked at David, then back to the board. Yes, I have Ms. Brennan's logs, her analysis, her unfinished warning. I have the timeline showing that the vulnerability appeared during the rushed migration, and I have my own complicity in ignoring her concerns because they were politically inconvenient. This is absurd, David said. Marcus is trying to deflect blame. I'm accepting blame, Marcus interrupted. I made the decision to remove Sarah Brennan from her position. That was my call, my mistake, but I made it under pressure from leadership that valued project timelines over security protocols, leadership that should have known better. Patricia's expression was unreadable. Gentlemen, I think we need separate discussions. Mr. Reeves, please step out. Mr. Chen, you stay. David looked like he wanted to argue, but Patricia's tone left no room for debate. He gathered his materials and left, the door closing behind him with a solid thunk. Explain, Patricia said. Marcus spent the next hour laying out everything. The cloud migration timeline, Sarah's warnings, the pressure to remove her, Jake Thompson's inadequate oversight. He showed them the logs, the draft email, the evidence that Sarah had compiled even after her termination. When he finished, the room was quiet. What do you recommend? Patricia asked finally. Marcus took a breath. Bring Sarah Brennan back. Give her whatever resources she needs to trace this breach. Commission an independent security audit of all our systems. And seriously reconsider the leadership structures that prioritized growth over security. That last recommendation includes you. Yes, it does. Patricia stood, signaling the meeting's end. We'll take this under advisement. In the meantime, you're authorized to reach out to Ms. Brennan, see if she's willing to consult on the investigation. As for the rest, she gathered her materials. Decisions will be made. Marcus left the conference room feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. He'd burned his relationship with David, possibly torpedoed his own career. But he'd also told the truth. After years of careful political navigation, of choosing diplomacy over directness, it felt almost liberating. He called Sarah from his office. That was fast, she answered. Did David have you escorted out already? Not yet, but I just threw him under the bus in front of the board, so probably soon. A pause. Seriously? Seriously. They want to know if you'll consult on the investigation. Full access to systems, whatever resources you need. And what do I get out of it, besides the satisfaction of proving I was right? Marcus smiled despite himself. How about we start with an apology from the company, a consulting rate that reflects your actual value, and my personal guarantee that anyone who interferes with your investigation answers to me. Your personal guarantee may not be worth much after today. Probably not, but it's what I have. Another pause, longer this time. I want complete autonomy. No oversight from Jake Thompson or anyone in David's chain. I report directly to you and the board, and I want it in writing. Done. Okay then. When do I start? Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. I'll have security badges ready. Marcus, yeah? This doesn't mean I forgive you. You still fired me for doing my job. I know, I'm not asking for forgiveness, just a chance to do better. Fair enough. See you tomorrow. Marcus ended the call and sat in the gathering darkness of his office. Through the window, Seattle glittered with evening lights. Somewhere out there were hackers with 2-3 million people's data, a company in crisis, and a career that might be over by week's end. But for the first time in days, Marcus felt like he was on the right side of the decisions he was making. Chapter 3. The Hunt. Sarah returned to Quantum's headquarters on a Wednesday morning that felt surreal in its normalcy. The same security guards, the same turnstiles, the same elevator that opened onto the 23rd floor. But everything had shifted. Jake Thompson met her in the lobby, his expression carefully neutral. "Sarah, welcome back." "Jake." She kept her voice professionally cool. They'd never been friends, but they'd worked together without active hostility, until he'd been given her job. "I've set up a workspace for you in the Security Operations Center. Full system access, everything you requested." He handed her a new badge. "Marcus said you're reporting directly to him now." "That's right." A flicker of something, resentment, maybe relief, crossed his face. "For what it's worth, I didn't ask for this situation, any of it. I know you're just not equipped for it." Jake's jaw tightened. "I've been doing my best, your best, Mr. Backdoor, that was sitting in our systems for 6 weeks. Your best let 2. 3 million people's data gets stolen." Sarah softened her tone slightly. "You're a good compliance officer, Jake. You make sure we check the right regulatory boxes. But hunting threats requires a different skill set. There's no shame in that." He looked like he wanted to argue, then just nodded. "Your workspace is ready. Good luck." The Security Operations Center hummed with tension. 2 FBI agents occupied one corner, their presence a constant reminder of how serious this had become. Sentinel Security's team worked in another corner, conducting forensics on compromised systems, and Sarah sat in the middle, surrounded by monitors and the familiar comfort of data that didn't lie. She started where she always started, with the timeline. The cloud migration had begun 8 weeks ago, initiated with great fanfare in a company-wide email from David Reeves. Phase 1. Move customer databases to Azure. Timeline. Accelerated to beat competitor offerings to market. Sarah pulled the deployment logs and began cross-referencing them with her earlier analysis. The backdoor had appeared during week 3 of the migration, inserted during a batch deployment at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. The deployment itself was legitimate, one of dozens that happened during the migration. But someone had modified the deployment template to include additional administrative access. "Who had access to the deployment templates?" she called out. One of the Sentinel consultants, a woman named Angela Chen, looked up. "At least 20 people. DevOps team, cloud architects, system administrators, a few executives who insisted on oversight access. I need a list. Everyone who touched those templates, even once. Already compiled. Sending it to you now." The list appeared on Sarah's screen. 23 names, ranging from junior developers to David Reeves himself. She started running correlations. Who accessed the templates, when, from what locations, using what credentials. Hours blurred together. Coffee appeared on her desk at regular intervals, brought by an administrative assistant who'd always been kind to her. Lunch was a sandwich eaten without tasting. The data consumed everything else. Around 4 p.m., Marcus appeared at her shoulder. "Find anything?" "Patterns." Sarah highlighted sections of her analysis. The backdoor deployment happened at 2:47 a.m. At 2:43 a.m., someone accessed the deployment template repository using David Reeves's credentials. Marcus leaned closer. "David was accessing systems at 2:43 in the morning? That's what the logs say. But look here." She pulled up another screen. At 2:41 a.m., those same credentials were used to access the system from a coffee shop in Fremont. David lives in Medina, on the east side of Lake Washington. There's no way he drove from his house to Fremont in 2 minutes. Stolen credentials, or shared ones, or someone logged in as David remotely. Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling more data. But here's the interesting part. That coffee shop, it has public Wi-Fi. Perfect place for someone to hide their actual location. But the network logs from that coffee shop show the connection came from a VPN endpoint in Romania. Angela Chen had joined them, listening intently. So someone in Romania used stolen credentials to modify the deployment template? Not just someone. Someone who knew exactly when the deployment would happen, what template to modify, and how to insert a backdoor that wouldn't trigger our standard security checks. Sarah pulled up the modified code. This is elegant work, professional. They knew our systems intimately. Inside job? Marcus asked, or someone who did extremely thorough reconnaissance? Sarah sat back, rubbing her eyes. I need to know who else accessed systems from unusual locations around that time. Pull logs for all privileged accounts, any access from outside the corporate network in the week before and after the backdoor deployment. One of the FBI agents, a tall man named Foster, spoke up. That's thousands of access events. Then I hope you brought comfortable shoes. They worked through the night. Sarah, Angela, 2 FBI agents, and a rotating cast of quantum staff who brought data, coffee, and increasingly worried expressions. Marcus stayed too, making calls to board members, deflecting media inquiries, keeping David Reeves away from the investigation. At 3:17 a.m., Sarah found it. Marcus! Her voice cut through the quiet hum of the operations center. Come look at this. He moved to her station, bleary-eyed and running on his 4th cup of coffee. What am I seeing? 2 days before the backdoor deployment, someone accessed our customer database schema using credentials belonging to Jennifer Hartley, one of our senior database administrators. Sarah highlighted the relevant logs. They downloaded the complete database structure, table definitions, relationship mappings, everything you'd need to know exactly what data to extract and how. Is that unusual? For a database administrator? Not necessarily, except Jennifer was on vacation in Hawaii when this access occurred. I checked with HR. Angela Chen pulled up additional data. The access came from the same VPN endpoint in Romania. 2 data points, Marcus said. That's not enough for... There are 7 data points. Sarah overlaid multiple access logs on the screen. 7 different employees, 7 different privileged accounts, all accessed from the same Romanian VPN over a 3-week period. They were systematic, methodical. Learn the database structure, identify the deployment process, insert the backdoor, wait for the right moment to extract data. Agent Foster joined them. Can you trace the VPN? We're working on it, Sarah said, but VPNs are designed to hide origin points. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. What about the compromised accounts? Marcus asked. How did they get those credentials? Sarah pulled up another screen, a long list of login attempts, failed authentications, successful breaches. Phishing. Probably. All 7 employees received emails around 6 weeks before the breach, supposedly from IT requesting password verification. Standard stuff, easy to fall for. So we train people better, implement better email filtering. That's closing the barn door after the horses are in the next county, Marcus. Sarah's frustration leaked through. Yes, we should do those things. But the real problem is that we have too many accounts with too much access. Principle of least privilege, people should only have access to what they absolutely need for their jobs. We've been handing out administrative credentials like candy. Angela nodded agreement. Standard security architecture problem, convenience over security. Marcus scrubbed his hands over his face. So we have Romanian IP addresses, compromised credentials, and a very sophisticated attacker. What's our next move? We find out who benefits, Sarah said. Follow the data. Who would want 3 million customer records? What can they do with that information? Agent Foster's phone rang. He stepped away to answer, spoke in low tones for several minutes, then returned with an expression that made Sarah's stomach tighten. That was our cybercrime liaison at Interpol. They've been tracking a dark web marketplace that specializes in high-value data breaches. Someone posted a new dataset for sale approximately 18 hours ago. Medical records, financial data, personally identifiable information. The sample data they're showing as proof matches your customer database. The room went very quiet. How much are they asking? Marcus's voice was hollow. $10 million. Bitcoin only. And they're claiming to have data on over 2 million individuals. 3 million, Sarah corrected quietly. That's our exact breach number, which means they've already catalogued and packaged the stolen data for sale. Angela looked sick. This was always the plan. Not ransom, not targeted attacks, just theft for profit. Sarah felt anger crystallize into something cold and hard in her chest. While she'd been fighting internal politics, while Marcus had been worried about cultural fit, criminals had been systematically breaching quantum systems, stealing data that would ruin lives. "Can Interpol track the seller?" she asked. "They're trying, but these marketplaces use multiple layers of anonymization. It could take weeks, months. We don't have months." Sarah pulled up the dark web listing, studying the sample data like it held answers. "Look at how they're categorizing the records. Age groups, geographic location, medical conditions. They're making it searchable, sortable. They've built a database interface for stolen data." "Why does that matter?" Marcus asked. "Because building a searchable interface takes time and resources. This isn't some lone hacker selling data in bulk. This is organized, professional, possibly a criminal enterprise with infrastructure." Angela leaned over Sarah's shoulder, studying the dark web interface. The listing says, "Verified authentic, full export completed." When did our breach happen? "Sunday night, 11 p.m. to 2 a.m., Marcus said. "And this listing went up 18 hours ago, which would be," Angela calculated, "Tuesday afternoon. That's barely 48 hours from breach to marketplace listing. They had this pipeline ready to go." Sarah felt pieces clicking together in her mind. They were confident. They knew exactly what they were stealing, how to package it, where to sell it. This wasn't opportunistic. Someone planned this for weeks, maybe months. Or someone inside the company helped plan it, Agent Foster said. The words hung in the air like smoke. "You're suggesting an insider threat," Marcus said slowly. "I'm suggesting we can't rule it out. 7 accounts compromised, all around the same time. That could be phishing. Or it could be someone who had access to those accounts, who knew when deployments happened, who understood your security gaps well enough to exploit them." Sarah's mind raced through the implications. She'd been so focused on external threats, on sophisticated hackers breaking in from outside. But what if the threat had been inside all along? "We need to look at the 7 compromised accounts again," she said. "Not just at how they were breached, but at who had access to them, who would know their typical usage patterns, who could impersonate them convincingly." "That's a massive investigation," Angela warned. "Then we better get started." Marcus's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression darkening. "The board is convening an emergency session at 9 a.m. They want updates on the investigation and—" He hesitated. "Recommendations for executive accountability." "Meaning they're deciding who to fire," Sarah said bluntly. "Meaning they're deciding how to respond to a catastrophic breach that's already hit the news cycle." Marcus pocketed his phone. "Whatever we find in the next few hours could determine the company's future." Sarah looked at the screens around her, data points and access logs, and the scattered pieces of a crime that had unfolded while they weren't looking. "Then I suggest we keep working." They reconvened at 8 a.m., exhausted but armed with new findings. Sarah had spent the last hours building a comprehensive timeline. Every compromised account, every unusual access, every data point that didn't fit normal patterns. And one name kept appearing in proximity to suspicious activity: Trevor Walsh, a senior cloud architect who'd been heavily involved in the migration project. "It's circumstantial," Sarah admitted, pulling up her analysis for the group. "But Trevor had access to all 7 compromised accounts through his role as system administrator. He would have received the phishing emails sent to those employees, could have easily harvested their credentials. And look at this." She highlighted a series of access logs. 2 hours after the breach, Trevor logged into the administrative portal from home to check on system status. But he didn't report any issues, he just looked around. "That's not proof," Marcus said. "No, but combined with this." Angela pulled up financial records that the FBI had subpoenaed. Trevor deposited 15,000 in cash to his bank account last week. When asked about it, he claimed it was from selling his car, but DMV records show he still owns the car. Agent Foster nodded slowly. "That's enough for a warrant. We can search his home, his computers, his communications." "Do it," Marcus said. "There's something else." Sarah pulled up another screen, her expression troubled. "I found deleted emails in the system backup. Communications between Trevor and someone outside the company discussing architecture consulting and knowledge transfer. The emails are cryptic, but the timing aligns perfectly with our reconnaissance timeline. Can you trace who he was talking to?" The emails went to a Proton Mail account, encrypted and anonymized. "But I can see the message headers and—" She highlighted a detail. "They were all sent during business hours from his work computer. He wasn't even trying to hide it because he didn't think anyone was looking." Marcus felt sick. An insider. Someone they'd trusted, paid, given access to their most critical systems. Someone who'd sold them out for money. "We notified Trevor's manager. Lock his accounts, coordinate with FBI for arrest," Agent Foster said, already making calls. But Sarah was staring at her screen, something else nagging at her. "Wait. Look at when Trevor's suspicious activity started. 6 weeks before the breach, right when I flagged the unusual access patterns. So I sent my concerns to the Security Review Board, which included—" She pulled up the distribution list. David Reeves, Jake Thompson, 3 other executives, and Trevor Walsh in his role as cloud infrastructure lead. The implications settled over the room like ice. "You're saying Trevor knew you were onto him," Marcus said. "I'm saying I announced to everyone on that list that I was tracking unusual activity, and within a week I was fired for being difficult and culturally incompatible." Angela spoke carefully. "Are you suggesting David Reeves was involved in the breach?" "I'm suggesting someone wanted me off the investigation, someone who had the authority to push for my removal." Sarah met Marcus's eyes. "You made the decision to fire me, but who pushed for it?" "David," Marcus said quietly. "He said I was becoming a liability to team cohesion, that my concerns about the migration were undermining the project. He insisted we needed someone more collaborative in the security role." Convenient timing. But David was the one who initiated the cloud migration. Why would he sabotage his own project? Maybe he didn't. Maybe he just wanted it to succeed so badly that he ignored security concerns and removed anyone who stood in the way. And maybe Trevor saw an opportunity in that desperation. They stared at the data, each seeing different patterns, different conclusions. Outside the operations center, Quantum's employees were arriving for a normal Wednesday, unaware that their company was unraveling from the inside. Agent Foster's phone rang again. He listened, his expression hardening. "Understood. We're on our way." He ended the call and looked at the group. Seattle PD attempted to execute a warrant at Trevor Walsh's home. He's not there. Neighbors say they saw him leave late last night with 2 suitcases. "He ran," Sarah said. "He ran. We've issued an APB, flagged his passport, frozen his accounts, but he had at least a 12-hour head start." Marcus slumped in his chair, feeling the weight of every decision that had led to this moment. They'd been so focused on growth, on competition, on stock prices, and while they'd looked away, someone had systematically dismantled their security and stolen the data of millions. "The board meeting starts in 45 minutes, he said. "What do I tell them?" Sarah began compiling a report, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency across the keyboard. You tell them we've identified a primary suspect in the breach. You tell them we're working with FBI to locate and apprehend him. You tell them the breach was enabled by security gaps that resulted from rushing the cloud migration. And you tell them, she paused, looking directly at Marcus. You tell them that the security analyst who warned about those gaps was fired for being inconvenient. That'll get me fired too. Probably. But it's the truth. Marcus nodded slowly. The truth. After all the political maneuvering, all the compromises, all the decisions made to preserve his own position, the truth felt like something solid to stand on. Okay, he said. Let's go tell them the truth. The boardroom had the atmosphere of a funeral. Patricia Monroe sat at the head of the table, flanked by attorneys and the other board members, their faces grave. David Reeves occupied his usual seat, but something had shifted in his demeanor, a defensiveness that hadn't been there before. Marcus presented the findings systematically, the timeline, the compromised accounts, Trevor Walsh's suspected involvement and subsequent flight, the dark web marketplace already selling their stolen data. He didn't soften the facts, didn't try to spin the narrative into something more palatable. When he finished, silence. Then Patricia spoke. Walk me through how we got here, not the technical details, the decisions. Marcus glanced at David, who sat stone-faced. No help there. We initiated an aggressive cloud migration to beat competitors to market, Marcus began. The timeline was tight, some would say impossible. Standard security protocols were streamlined to meet deadlines. When our senior security analyst raised concerns about unusual access patterns, she was dismissed as being difficult and not a team player. By whom? Patricia asked, though her eyes suggested she knew the answer. By me, ultimately. I made the decision to terminate Sarah Brennan, but that decision was influenced by pressure from executive leadership that viewed her concerns as obstacles to the migration timeline. David finally spoke. That's a gross oversimplification. Sarah was... Right, Marcus interrupted. She was right. About everything, the access patterns, the security gaps, the risks of rushing deployment. And we removed her from her position because listening to her would have meant slowing down. Patricia turned to David. You advocated strongly for Ms. Brennan's termination. Why? Because she was insubordinate. She questioned executive decisions publicly, undermined project timelines, and created friction with other departments. David's voice was steady, but Marcus could see the tension in his jaw. Her technical skills were never in question. Her ability to work within organizational constraints was... And where did those organizational constraints come from? The market doesn't wait for perfect security. We had a window to establish dominance in our space. Sometimes you have to accept calculated risks. This wasn't a calculated risk. Sarah's voice came from the doorway. She'd been invited to present her technical findings. This was a choice to ignore expert warnings because they were inconvenient. There's a difference. Patricia gestured for her to enter. Ms. Brennan, your perspective would be valuable. Sarah moved to the presentation screen, pulling up her comprehensive analysis. The breach was preventable at multiple stages. When the cloud migration was announced, I recommended a security review process that would have added 3 weeks to the timeline. Rejected. When I identified anomalous access patterns, I requested an immediate audit of privileged accounts. Ignored. When I sent my draft warning about the administrative access issues, I was fired before I could present my findings. So this is entirely about leadership failure, one of the board members said. No, Sarah corrected. This is about an organizational culture that prioritized speed over security. Trevor Walsh is responsible for his actions, if he's indeed our criminal, and evidence strongly suggests he is. But he succeeded Because we created an environment where security concerns could be dismissed, where corners could be cut, where the person raising alarms could be removed instead of heard. David stood abruptly. This is absurd. I'm being blamed for trying to keep this company competitive. You're being held accountable for ignoring critical security warnings, Patricia said quietly. Please sit down, David. The remainder of the meeting unfolded with clinical precision. Patricia asked questions. Sarah provided answers. Marcus corroborated with documentation. By noon, the picture was complete and damning. Patricia called for a recess. Board members only. Everyone else, please wait outside. Marcus and Sarah found themselves in the executive lounge, an awkward silence settling between them. Through the windows, Seattle sprawled beneath a rare, sunny sky, Puget Sound glittering in the distance. Your career is probably over, Sarah said finally. Probably. Why did you do it? The truth-telling, I mean. You could have found a way to protect yourself. Marcus considered the question. Because for the last decade, I've been making decisions based on what would advance my career. And somewhere in all that calculation, I forgot why I went into technology in the first place. It wasn't supposed to be about stock options and board approval. It was supposed to be about building something meaningful. That's very philosophical for someone who just committed professional suicide. He smiled despite himself. Yeah, well, at least I'll have time to think about philosophy while I'm unemployed. Sarah's expression softened slightly. For what it's worth, you did the right thing today. Does that mean you forgive me? It means I'm willing to believe you've learned something. The door opened. Patricia Monroe emerged alone. Miss Brennan, Mr. Chen, please come back in. Lean. They returned to find the board arranged in formal positions, documents in front of them. Patricia's expression was unreadable. The board has reached several decisions, she began. Effective immediately, David Reeves is removed as Chief Operating Officer. He will be offered a separation package contingent upon his full cooperation with the ongoing investigation and non-disparagement agreements. David's face went white, then red. He gathered his materials without a word and left, the door closing with controlled violence. Secondly, Patricia continued, we are appointing an interim executive team to oversee security remediation. Marcus, you'll retain your position as VP of Operations, but will report directly to the board during this transition period. Your compensation will be reduced by 30% for the next year as a consequence of the security failures that occurred under your oversight. Marcus nodded. Fair, probably more than fair, given his role. Ms. Brennan, the board would like to offer you the position of Chief Information Security Officer, reporting directly to the board. You will have full authority over security infrastructure, hiring, and budget. We'll start with a base salary of $280,000, equity package to be determined, and a signing bonus of $50,000 as compensation for the wrongful termination. Sarah's eyes widened. CISO, unless you'd prefer a different title, the role is yours if you want it. For the first time since Marcus had known her, Sarah Brennan looked uncertain. Yes, I accept. Good. Patricia allowed herself a small smile. Then let's talk about fixing this mess. The next 3 months were brutal. Trevor Walsh was apprehended at a border crossing into Canada, where FBI agents and Canadian authorities had been coordinating surveillance. The evidence recovered from his devices was overwhelming: detailed communications with the dark web marketplace, cryptocurrency wallets containing payments, and a methodical plan for the breach that had taken months to develop. He hadn't acted entirely alone. The investigation uncovered connections to an Eastern European cybercrime syndicate that specialized in corporate espionage and data theft. Trevor had been their inside man, recruited through online forums and motivated by a combination of financial need. His mother's medical bills had bankrupted him, and resentment toward a company that paid executives millions while capping his own salary. It didn't excuse his actions. 3 million people still had their data compromised, their lives disrupted, class action lawsuits piled up, regulatory fines mounted, quantum stock price plummeted before slowly beginning recovery. But understanding the how and why allowed them to rebuild intelligently. Sarah approached the CISO role with the same relentless focus she'd brought to the investigation. She built a security team from scratch, refusing to hire anyone who prioritized compliance over actual protection. She implemented strict least privilege access controls, multi-factor authentication on all systems, and continuous monitoring that would have caught Trevor's reconnaissance in real time. She also insisted on what she called security with empathy, recognition that employees weren't the enemy, that most security breaches resulted from human error rather than malice, and that creating a culture of fear around mistakes would only make people hide problems instead of reporting them. Marcus watched her work with a mixture of admiration and relief. She was everything the company needed. Technically brilliant, politically fearless, and unwilling to compromise on principles. She was also, he had to admit, everything he'd failed to be when it mattered most. His own role had shifted. The 30% pay cut hurt less than he'd expected. He'd been paid too much to begin with. He could see that now. The board oversight was more challenging, requiring him to justify decisions that he'd once made unilaterally. But it forced clarity, forced him to articulate the real reasoning behind operational choices. Mostly, it forced him to be honest. He and Sarah developed an unlikely working relationship. Not friendship exactly, there was too much history for that, but mutual respect, occasional collaboration, and the shared experience of having lived through crisis together. On a Friday evening in early spring, Marcus found Sarah still in her office at 7 p.m., reviewing security logs on multiple monitors. "You know, as your technically superior officer, I can order you to go home," he said from her doorway. She glanced up, smirking. "As CISO, I can override your authority on security matters, and I consider my own workaholic tendencies a security risk that only I can manage." Fair point. He entered and sat in her visitor chair. "The board meeting went well today. Patricia said our security posture has improved more in 3 months than in the previous 3 years. Patricia says lots of things to make people feel better, but yeah, we're making progress." Sarah closed one of her screens. Interpol recovered about 40% of the stolen data from the marketplace before it could be sold. It's not perfect, but it's something. And Trevor? Pleading guilty to multiple federal charges, looking at 15 to 20 years. His lawyers are trying to argue mitigating circumstances, the medical debt, the company's security negligence, but I don't think it'll help much. Marcus nodded. He'd testified at Trevor's preliminary hearing, describing the security culture that had existed before the breach. It had been uncomfortable, admitting publicly how badly they'd failed, but necessary. "I've been thinking about something you said," Sarah continued, "about forgetting why you got into technology in the first place." "Ah, yes, my melodramatic confession in the executive lounge. You bringing that up to mock me?" "Actually, no. I've been guilty of the same thing. I was so focused on being right, on catching threats, on proving my expertise, that I forgot the whole point is to protect people. Real people with real lives who trusted us with their data. And maybe we both needed this to remember what actually matters." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the evening light fade over Seattle. Outside, the city hummed with life, people finishing work, heading home, living ordinary moments that depended on invisible infrastructure working properly, on data staying secure, on companies keeping their promises. The new security architecture goes live Monday, Sarah said. Full deployment across all systems. If I've done my job right, we'll never have a breach like this again. And if something gets through anyway, then we'll catch it faster, respond smarter, and actually listen when someone raises concerns. She met his eyes. That's the real lesson, isn't it? Not the technical stuff, that's always evolving, but creating a culture where people can speak up without being fired for being inconvenient. Speaking of which, I approved your budget request for the Security Awareness Training Program. All employees, quarterly sessions, with executive participation mandatory. Even the board members, especially the board members, Patricia insisted. Sarah smiled, genuine and unguarded. You know, Marcus, you're actually not terrible at this leadership thing when you stop worrying about your career and focus on doing what's right. High praise. Don't let it go to your head. He stood to leave, then paused. Sarah, thank you for coming back, for giving us another chance, for being exactly as difficult and uncompromising as you always were. Turns out that's what we needed. She waved him off, embarrassed. Go home to your wife. I've got logs to review. Marcus left, walking through Quantum's offices toward the elevator. The building was mostly empty at this hour, just the security team in their operations center and a few dedicated workaholics like Sarah. The elevator descended and he pulled out his phone to text his wife. Heading home. What sounds good for dinner? Her response came immediately. You. On time for once. We can order in. He smiled. Small victories. Ordinary moments. The rebuilding of trust one day at a time. The elevator opened onto the lobby, where new security protocols required badge verification even for exiting. Marcus scanned his badge and nodded to the guard, a young woman named Martinez, who Sarah had personally recruited from the FBI's cybercrime unit. Have a good weekend, Mr. Chen. You too, Martinez. Outside, Seattle's spring evening wrapped around him. Cool air, the smell of rain coming, the sound of traffic and conversation. Marcus walked to his car thinking about second chances, about the difference between being competent and being courageous, about the strange journey that had led from a moment of terrible judgment to something that might actually be redemption, not forgiveness. Sarah had been right about that. You couldn't undo harm with apologies, but you could learn, you could do better, you could build something more honest than what came before. Marcus drove home through the city, past the coffee shops and tech offices, and ordinary lives that depended on people like him and Sarah getting it right. The weight of that responsibility felt different now, less about his own success, more about the trust that came with position and power. His phone buzzed with a message from Sarah, new anomaly in the access logs, probably nothing. But following up Monday, this is what vigilance looks like, BW. He texted back, this is why we pay you the big bucks. Her response, you're paying me what I'm worth now. There's a difference. Marcus laughed and put his phone away. The road stretched ahead, traffic slowing for the weekend rush. Somewhere in an Eastern European prison, Trevor Walsh was facing the consequences of his choices. Somewhere across America, 2-3 million people were rebuilding their credit, monitoring their accounts, dealing with the aftermath of theft. And somewhere in Quantum's headquarters, Sarah Brennan was hunting threats in the data, making sure it never happened again. Not perfect, not simple, but honest and real and maybe enough. Marcus pulled into his driveway as the first drops of rain began to fall. Inside, light glowed from the kitchen windows. His wife was cooking, their home was warm, and tomorrow he would go back to work as someone who'd learned the hard way that doing the right thing mattered more than doing the convenient thing. It had taken a catastrophic breach, a wrongful firing, and the near destruction of his career to learn that lesson. But he had learned it, and that, Marcus thought, as he walked through the rain to his front door, was something worth building on. 3 months later, Quantum Systems published a comprehensive security report detailing their breach, their failures, and their remediation. It became required reading in cybersecurity programs across the country, not as an example of what to do, but as honest documentation of what happens when organizations ignore the people trying to protect them. Sarah Brennan spoke at industry conferences about creating security cultures that valued dissent over compliance. Her presentations always included the same closing line: "The most dangerous vulnerabilities aren't in your code. They're in your willingness to silence the people who see them." And Marcus Chen remained at Quantum, no longer climbing toward executive glory, but working to build something sustainable, something honest. Something that prioritized protection over profit. Not every story ends with redemption, but some end with learning. And in the messy, complicated reality of human systems and fallible judgment, that might be the best any of them could hope for.